Materials that you will need for this lesson. You will need a piece of white paper with no lines on it. You will also need a sharpened pencil. If your pencil does not have a good eraser, you may want to get a secondary eraser, but you shouldn't be doing too much erasing. So today I'm going to be going over a basic tutorial on drawing eyes. Drawing a human eye is an important skill for an artist. If they want to know how to draw a portrait, the eyes can make or break that portrait in terms of making it look more or less realistic or believable. We see a lot of life in the eyes, and if you know how to do that well, some of the other aspects or some of the other parts of drawing a face or a person don't matter as much because we're drawn to looking at the eye. So we can think of this a couple different ways. One way would be to think of the shape as something that looks like this. Looks kind of like if you took a football and you smushed it, or like an almond shape. That's just if you started with a point here and a point here, it's a line that goes upwards, a line that curves up, and a line that curves down. To make it easier on yourself, if you wanted to draw that with those 2-point method, you would just go up and then rotate your page so that you can go like this. Now that's a very basic eye shape. You could do it like that if you want to, or I can show you one other shape to make the eye that may add a little bit of detail to it. So this method is going to be to think of the eye as a shape that's kind of like this. You know what shape this is? That's called a parallelogram. So if we look at this drawing that I did of one of my eyes, I did this with pencil and then colored it with oil pastel. But you can kind of see how this shape gets stretched down here and off this way. And that's where we get this kind of shape. So it's, instead of making the two curved lines, it's more angular, more like a parallelogram. That allows this part of the eye right here, where the tear duct is towards the inside of your face, to stretch out a bit. So I'm going to use that shape, but you can feel free to use the standard, just smushed football looking shape. Keep this. There we go. Okay. So here we go. Make it kind of small, because if you make it super large, it's just going to take you forever. So I start with my basic parallelogram. I'm going to allow this shape to go like this a little bit. All right. And then there are different parts to the eye. There is the white of the eye, which, surprise, surprise, is the white part. There is the iris of the eye, which is the colored part. So if you hear somebody say they have blue eyes or brown eyes, the part that they're talking about is this part right here, which is a ring right in the center. And then the circle that's in the very center, that's called the pupil. And that's the black part where light enters your eye. Then you got things like the eyelid here and the eyelashes. But that stuff isn't quite as important for us right this second. Let's figure out the iris. If you make the iris too small, it makes it look like the person is very surprised about something. Like if this was a person's eye, it makes it look like their eye is wide open. And we want to relax the eye a bit. So we're going to make the iris bigger. We're in fact going to make that circle so large that it goes up underneath the eyelid and you can't actually see the whole thing. So instead of thinking of it as a circle, we're going to think of it as two curved lines. One like this, and one like this. So that would be, I would imagine this line going underneath the eyelids to make a larger circle. So once I have the iris drawn in, then directly in the center of that shape, I'm going to draw a smaller circle. That is my basic outlines needed to do the eye. Then for the eyelid, we just kind of take this line right here for the top of the eye and we just move it up a little bit. Okay. So now we're going to be talking about light and shadow, how to make this look three-dimensional, more realistic and believable. In the art world, we use the word value to talk about lightness and darkness. High values being things that are light and low values being things that are dark. So if we want to be able to create a range of values from high to low or light to dark, we don't want to hold our pencil like this. This is great for writing sentences because you can push hard and you can control the pencil. But for drawing, that's not very good because you can't control the pressure. If you move your hand up like this, now you're able to make very, very light lines that can be connected together to make what you would think of as like a shade or a tone where you're adding a shadow to the paper. So that's what we're going to do to add value. Another good thing is that if you were drawing like this, notice how you can't see your own picture as you're working. If you hold your pencil out here, now you can see what you're doing as it's happening. So you can keep your eye, pun intended, dad joke, on the picture so that you don't get ahead of yourself. So I'm going to start right up here. When shading something, you want to think about where is the light coming from. And when a person is standing up, the light is going to be coming from overhead. So the eyelid is going to cast a shadow onto the eyeball itself. And that's where this shadow is coming from. There's a part of the eye towards the middle, like your nose would be here, towards the inside of your head, the inside of your face. This part right here, that's called a tear duct, and that's where your tears come from. And that's just very simple, like a little curved line like that makes that shape. So the eyeball is a sphere. It's round. And as it turns back into space in the corners, it is going to get a little bit of shadow. So I have shadow here from the eyelid, and then I also have a little bit of shading from there. But it's very light because this is still the white of the eye. The iris is going to get darker out towards the edges, and then there's going to be some light spots in here. So I'll start by just darkening out by the edge. It can get pretty dark out there. Sometimes it can even get close to black out by the edges, even for a person who has light colored eyes. All right, now let's talk about directional shading. Directional shading, I'm just talking about which direction is your pencil moving as you are making a shade or a shadow. And for the iris, when you're shading it, you want to think of it like this. If this is the iris and the pupil, your lines always point towards the center. If you look real up close in the mirror or in a picture or even at a person's eye, you will notice that there are little lines in there that do just that. They go in towards the center. So I have dark on the outside, and then I have all these little lines pointing in. Okay, then a little bit of shading in here. Always pointing towards the center, though. Had some dark ones in there to bring it to life a bit more. Then the pupil is going to be black, but there's going to be a white spot on it where light is bouncing off and hitting very directly. So pick a spot to put a highlight, leave that white, but then color the rest of the pupil. Notice how my hand has moved up the pencil so that I can push good and hard and control the movement of the pencil to get that dark value. Okay, so I have black, I have a white highlight, I have the shading in the iris in the correct direction. So then I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before and see if I can add a little bit more very lightly in here, like shade in the tear duct a bit, maybe get this a little bit more, hit that shadow a little harder up here, just to make it look more realistic. So then for the eyelashes, they're going to kind of start right on the eyelid here, and they're just going to go like this. They're going to curve out away from the center of the face, like away from the nose. And don't go overboard here, making them super duper long. Even for females. Then if you want to add a few down here, but very carefully and very small. I wouldn't overdo it, especially if you're a boy. You may not be happy with the way that looks. You might. That's fine too. The eyebrow is kind of going to follow this same shape. So you could just think of it as that and give it a light shade here. The shading outside of the eye is extremely light for now because we're not going to do much with it, but directional shading, it is going to follow the direction of this part of the face. So a little bit of shadow here just to make it look more believable. All right, I'm not going to get into too much detail here about what the eyebrow should look like, but it's kind of shaped like that. I'm not going to make it all that detailed right now. Very light shadow here. So we call it the white of the eye, but in reality, it's not very white at all. It actually appears as more of a gray, but it's white compared to everything else. So that's the basics of eye drawing. I don't want you to stress out too much over this. Think of it as just kind of helpful tips for in the future when we draw portraits. This is a way for us to make them look a little bit more realistic or lifelike. All right, I will be here if you need me, so check back in.